Welcome to the Back and Forth Show. And here on the show, we aim to bring knowledge, information, and resources to inspire, enlighten, and help young men and women in the community transform their lives. And my name is TK. And on the show with me this morning, I got Mr. Stanley Gbandawa.
Good morning.
How's in the going? House. Good morning. Good morning. He requested mimosas, so I came in clutch with the mimosas this morning. And
no, it was a good pick.
It's actually a good choice, and I actually picked out a good one. Because, I don't know much about champagne, so.
Well, you did good. You got the brut rosé. It's a little dry, but nice fruity hints in there.
You just drown it in orange juice. All right. So our topic today here is called Breaking Through and Breaking Free, and I'm really, really excited about this topic because I think it doesn't just resonate with the Black community, but this is something that anybody can really take and use for their lives. So before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about Stan. He's actually an accomplished operations manager for a local investment management company with more than 15 years of service leadership and associates to provide first-class customer service to aid in the overall growth of an organization. And he's delivered measurable efficiency gains through project management and providing first-class client satisfaction. He has also built and strengthened staff and administration. During his spare time, Stanley spends a lot of time serving as vice chair on the boards at the Pikes Peak Boys and Girls Club. Since I've known Stan, he's been doing that faithfully, and also at East Lake High School, an alternative school for post-secondary options and mentoring youth as a big with Big Brother Sister. Is that what the
Big Brother and Big Sister?
Big Brother and Big Sister. Yeah. Stanley, he resides in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with his two daughters, Della and Celine.
Della, oh
my goodness, Della and Celine. And they are so cute, by the way.
Well,
they're adorable. And his lovely CHO, Chief Home Officer, Ronnie Paul. That's cute.
Yeah, she typically runs things, so I gotta get into the C-suite somehow.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I'm so glad to have you. Thanks for joining me this morning. Before we get started, though, just a quick icebreaker question.
Okay.
How long did you go without a haircut when quarantine started?
Oh, man. Let's see. So, March, I think I got my first cut in. It was shortly after they opened the barbershops back up. I'll probably say it was about the June timeframe, but for me, it was rough.
It was a rough time in life. So you had a whole afro.
I normally get a haircut almost maybe once a week.
Oh.
And to go from that to nothing was a lot. I quick story, I FaceTimed my sister, and she did a double take. She said, "You look like a grizzly bear."
Oh, no, she didn't.
Yeah.
Shade. You could have talked about her nails if she gets her nails done. I know, because I know I had, one missing, two missing on each finger, and they were grown out. Like, I was looking like a grizzly bear. So, But anyway, so jumping into the topic, taking control and breaking free. And again, like I said before, like this is such a relevant topic just for anyone. But before we get started, why don't you just tell me a little bit about your background? I know that you're not from here.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
So I grew up in, I'll say, Silver Spring, Germantown, Maryland. I was originally born in South Carolina. Parents relocated to Maryland when I was about 7. And then when I was about 8, my parents split. And so my mom and my sister, I have 2 younger sisters, and we moved out to Germantown, Maryland. So that's pretty much where I grew up from the time I was about 8 until I left to go to college when I was 18. So I spent some time. I went to school out in Baltimore, Morgan State University, or should I say the Morgan State University,
Hey.
HBCU, and then relocated here to Colorado Springs in 2007 for job opportunities. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about my background. I don't know where you want to go from there, but
no, that's okay. I just kind of wanted to, for our listeners, just to understand, just more about where you came from.
Okay.
So, why do you feel like this is a relevant topic?
Well, I think breaking free is one of those topics, like you said, TK, where it doesn't just apply to the African American community, but I think it's very important for the African American community to address breaking free. Mm-hmm. Just for me personally, just growing up and seeing a lot of cycles, whether it's generational cycles. On the flip side, there are generational blessings, but just to see what, a lot of my family members have gone through over the years, passing along I'll say, some bad practices or bad habits over the years. So, and you and I, we've had some conversation around this topic before, and I think it's important for people to understand that there's certain things that they may not be aware of that may be holding them back from accomplishing their purpose. And for me, purpose is very important. That's what drives me day in, day out, is knowing what my purpose is and being able to, whether it's accomplish that or help people out based on what I feel like how it was created to be.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that some people, depending on what type of environment they grew up in, right? They find themselves in this toxic, situation where maybe they just don't know how to step out or step around. Maybe they know what their purpose is, but sometimes it seems so broad and so out of reach from where they are now. What would you say is the first step towards, moving forward?
It's a great question. I'd say first step is just being aware. And when I say aware, just being aware of, whether it's your history, your family history, whether it's steps that you may have taken over time, over a period of time, and just being able to identify, like, okay, why does this obstacle, why do I always run into this obstacle? What is it that I'm doing? And then for me, just being able to assess my family, that was very important. Quick story here is that my dad's family's from Africa, from Sierra Leone. So I'm first generation in the United States, first born actually on my dad's side here in the U.S. So I had a cousin come over from Africa. This was probably about 10 years ago, and we met. And it was one of those things where it was like, wow, we're definitely related. The lips, the nose. You're like, right. Yeah, you're definitely one of us. But we had a great conversation. But one thing he pointed out during our conversation was that there wasn't anyone on my dad's side of the family that was the term that he used, properly and legally married. Mm. And so I took a look at that and I said, huh. And I started looking, looked at myself at the time. I had just gone through a divorce. I looked at my sisters. They weren't married, but they were having relationships. And I started going across various levels, and I was like, wow, he's right. And legally, meaning having a marriage ceremony, license, certificate. Right. But we had family members that were married, but they were living together, but they were never legally married. And then properly married. Some were legally married, but some weren't. I mean, I've got a couple uncles that are actually to this day living in other states, but they're still married to their wife that lives in Maryland.
Oh, how does that work?
So that's just one example of just being able to be aware of, some things that I believe, were kind of passed down or cyclical within families. And I think as African Americans, just based on a lot of the topics that are at the forefront today, with the diaspora, with systemic issues that are taking place, slavery, I think it's important for us to be able to take a look back and see some of these cycles and things like that have happened, so that eventually we can get to a point where we can maybe break them or change them.
Right. So that basically jumps back into generational curses, which is very important. I mean, I can share one of the things for my family was just finances and management. Like my parents, they grew up poor without much at all. Both of my parents did. And then the generations before and then there's slavery, right? And so my parents, luckily, they were the ones to really come in and break that generational curse because they were aware, like, this is a problem, and they were continuing to walk in that path of making the same mistakes. And they decided to go a different direction. Tell me about, some, maybe a toxic situation or maybe just some generational curses, just in your own personal life that you experienced.
I think, again, assessing the family, the, divorce, that's one. children out of wedlock. I have two younger sisters, like I mentioned earlier, and then my middle sister, she has two children. And when you take a step back a couple generations, my grandmother had two children.
Oh, wow.
Yep. No dad in the house. Father wasn't there. So I kind of see her repeating some of that cycle.
Right.
Whereas my younger sister, she doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. She's like, no kids. She's having no kids. Myself, on the other hand, I've got two kids. I have a significant other, but we're not legally married. So that goes back to another issue, right?
Right.
So for me, it's just important to be aware of what some of those issues, or it could be curses, are, and being able to address those. So I will get married at some point.
I already told you. I gave you ideas now on how to make this happen.
hopefully I can break that cycle and that curse. But yeah, to go back to your question is, just taking a look and assessing those cycles. It's those curses. It's important, but it's also important to recognize the blessings, generational blessings. Because going back to my grandmother, great person. I mean, she pretty much raised me and my siblings, from an upbringing, from a work ethic standpoint. She didn't have a high school. She didn't have a high school diploma, and she was able to have two children, raise them. She was married at a couple points in her life, but then she, from South Carolina, went up to New York. She had a very strong work ethic, and I think those are some of the things that me and my siblings were able to carry forth. So when you acknowledge the curses, also acknowledge the blessings too. Don't forget about those.
Yeah, definitely. So, we've established that generational curses, obviously, and just being able to identify what it is that we need to, take control of, to begin with. So I guess the question would beg is, how do you know, like, what your purpose is?
That's a tough one. I get that question quite often. I'd say that I'm blessed and fortunate enough to have understood what my purpose was from a very young age. I take a look at the environments. I'm a believer. I believe where God puts you, He puts you certain places for a reason. So I took a look at a lot of the environments that I was in growing up, and where I grew up at, I'd probably say 90% of the families were single parent homes.
Right.
And most of my friends, we were actually having this conversation a couple weeks ago, grew up in single parent homes. And so we became our own family. But to go back to answer your question was looking at the environments that I'm in. So I was always in environments where it was underprivileged children, whether it was a teen center, youth nights, things like that. Just our neighborhood. I mean, when we were growing up, we were my mother had subsidized housing, so we had government assistance growing up.
Right.
And a lot of my friends came from that. So at an early age, I was kind of immersed in an environment to where there's just a lot of underprivileged children. And for me, that's what I identified as my purpose, is being able to assist those underprivileged children that don't necessarily have a voice. And that also it gets extended to whether it's children in Africa, so supporting, some local organizations like Compassion International and the work that they do out in the field, again, for underprivileged or underserved children. As you read through my bio, a lot of the organizations that I'm part of and I support are to assist with children that are underserved. So that's what I identified as my purpose, just looking at the environments that are placed in, spend some time asking the Lord, hey, why'd you create me? What's my purpose?
Right.
And that's what was given to me. It's funny you mentioned that. As I was getting ready this morning, and it started to take place probably about a couple of weeks ago, I felt like there's something shifting to where I'm kind of moving away from the focus on children to other causes, maybe.
Right.
But, I'm just kind of digesting that to see, okay, well, what opportunities come my way. For me, it's been where a lot of these organizations that I've supported, some I've sought out, but a lot of these opportunities were brought my way. And I think that's kind of very important, because I believe that if it's if it's my purpose, things will come naturally, and I don't necessarily have to force doors open.
Right.
So everything's has always worked out in that respect.
That's an important point that you bring up, and I've never really thought about it that way. Is, as we move forward in life, God may give us one thing to work on, but our purpose could, be consistently changing all the time. And maybe we were here to do one thing in this area. Now, once we've done that, we got to move on to something else.
Yeah, I think it's just, I look at it, it's seasonal. The seasons change, times change.
Mhm.
And you're right. I mean, again, looking at the settings, because the settings that I'm in, when I, was talking about the different opportunities that were coming my way as
Right.
I was growing up, they're starting to change.
Mhm.
So the different venues, the settings that I'm being put in, the people that are in my environment, surroundings, I'm seeing that it's starting to change. So I think that's where there's a shifting that's taking place, and it might be time for me to move on to do something different.
Right. So I just want to back up a little bit because you shared a little bit more about kind of your childhood and just the environment that you grew up in. And I think there's so many young people
Mm.
that are in a situation like that where it's, okay, I have a single, my mom's a single mom, she's working, we don't have that much income. So sometimes like getting to college or getting to that next step seems so unattainable when you come from, a situation as that.
Mhm.
Not everybody gets that chance. And, when you walk into a situation, you're already defeated. You're like, I came from this. I don't even know how I'm going to get there.
Yep.
It can be a struggle. So can you just share a little bit about just your journey, like getting into college? What changed in your situation? What did you do to kind of take control of your life to get to that next step?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to Mama Shirley. My mother was very instrumental in that space. One, given because of her faith. She's a very strong, firm faith, and
She's a prayer warrior.
she's a prayer warrior to the extreme.
My mom is too, so I know.
And I think we need that.
Hmm.
So for those listeners out there, pray for you. If you have children, pray for your children.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess that's the first thing. And, growing up, on the East Coast, like you said, not having a lot, it was kind of rough.
Hmm.
But one thing my mother always instilled in us was that, worry about your situation, your own personal situation.
Right.
Don't worry about what other people have. You never know how they got it.
Hmm.
Whether someone, they may have sold drugs or done something to get whatever it is, material things.
Hmm.
So those are some of the things she instilled in us. So for me, taking that forward, even it being a little rough, that's kind of what kind of guided and helped me, because I wasn't a follower, because I couldn't follow because I didn't have the things that other people had.
Right.
So I kind of had to set my own path. That's actually really helped me out to this day, because it gives me a sense of comfort of who I am, my identity in me, my identity in Christ. So that gives me that comfort there, because be comfortable with who I am, who I was created to be. So again, growing up, being able to be comfortable with myself. I always had a lot of friends. Friends were always welcoming. But as far as my journey, a lot of it was just being determined that there were certain circumstances similar to what you said, like with your family and finances, that, okay, looking back, my family, my grandmother, I had cousins, things like that, where they sacrifice a lot.
Hmm.
And I look at the principle of sacrifice is like they gave up something to allow something else to come into
Right.
that place. And so for me, I look at it and I said, well, my grandmother sacrificed this, my mom sacrificed that, my cousins, they were much older than me at the time. They weren't able to, go out and play sports and things like that, especially down south. They were sharecroppers.
Hmm.
So they were out in fields.
Right.
And that's not too many far generations removed.
No, it's not.
And so looking at that really sparked a fire, lit a fire in me to say, okay, well, if they sacrifice that, if our ancestors sacrifice all this blood, their lives, there's no reason why I can't go forward and be successful and do things that I feel like I need to do or was created to do.
Hmm.
So that's what really lit the fire for me. in the midst of having to navigate growing up
Mm-hmm.
on the East Coast, in the streets. Thank God for mentors. Thank God for basketball,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what really kept me out of trouble. That's what also took me to a lot of different places,
Mm-hmm.
playing sports, interacting with different various types of people. I mean, white millionaires to, to white people on welfare, blacks in the hood,
Mm-hmm.
different places. So a lot of exposure there. So being able to navigate that, I felt like, okay, I can't let certain people down, family members, myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's a lot riding on you.
so it was it's
Yeah,
a
it's a
lot,
lot.
right?
Yeah.
My siblings, I had 2 sisters, and I felt like I had to set the bar high for them. So for me, there was a point also where I had moved back to Maryland for a couple years. I lived with my father, mind the fact that he wasn't in the
Mm-hmm.
house growing up.
Right.
So that was a different dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
You got 2 men
That don't know as much about each other, right? Maybe if he.
We would spend summers with
Uh-huh.
our father, for the most part.
Okay.
And he was always challenging us. We talked to him over the phone, but it was different being in a house because as a young male, there was some animosity there too.
Right.
But we got to a point to where we were butting heads, and I was given that order: you either go to school or you get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a friend that was attending Morgan at the time, and he came back. He would come back home every so often, and he said, "Hey, man, get your Sunday's best. We're going to go to homecoming." I was still in high school at the time, so I went up, pull my slacks and a nice
you
shirt.
were excited, huh?
I was excited, so we went and hung out, and I was like, "Okay, this is what it's like if you can hang out and have a good time and and get an education." I was like, "Where do I sign up?"
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the delay for me, whether it was applying to different colleges and schools, really despite my father at that time,
Mm-hmm.
because we had some conversations. But I think that was one of the first turning points in my journey, was being able to get out of my environment, get into an environment to where people were attending school. And at the end of the day, to me, that equaled at some point, you got to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first turning point. So college went great.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the second turning point was right before my first marriage. Just looking at my family dynamic, the dynamic that I had with my siblings, the dynamic that I had with my mother, that was a pretty tough one. And I think that was one where when you talk about breaking free, and I see this in the African American community, and it's kind of almost like a default when the father's out of the home, especially in single parent homes, when the father's out of the home and there's a male there, the male's given this responsibility at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was the age of 8. And so before I got married, I started to take a look back, and
So you mean that you're the man of the house
I'm the
type?
man.
I got to take care of everyone.
I got to take care of everyone. I'm the
Right.
man of the house at 8.
Poor thing.
Exactly, right?
It's a lot of responsibility for an 8-year-old.
And I get why we do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily agree with it, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, we're created, again, going back to seasons and times where at 8, you're a child, right? You're not even a teenager yet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain things that happens to us over time with our bodies. We become a teenager, you go through puberty, things like that. And I think that's how God created us for specific reasons. But to give a young male, young boy, young kid that much responsibility at 8 is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got adults that can't even handle
That's true.
the responsibility
That
of
is so
taking
true.
care of their kids, but you put that on an 8-year-old. So I actually met with she was the pastor at the time, and we were just having some conversations. She just started really speaking into my situation, and I was like, well, wow, okay.
She read you, huh?
She told me my whole life without
Mm-hmm.
even, I mean, this was all within a matter of like 20 minutes of just being in her presence. She's like, can we talk for a second? And she just started, I was like, man, like I don't think we even had Google at the time. Like you can Google certain things.
That's how you know God is real, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she just started speaking into my life, and she talked, and that's what she had shared with me, just the responsibilities that I was given at a young age, that's not how things were created. And she said, me being the male, growing up, I mean, my sisters would come to me like I was their father. Even to this day, sometimes they come to me like I'm their dad. And so there was a point where I had to have a conversation start with my sisters to say, hey, I'm your brother. Because growing up, we would have these conversations. We'd be on the phone talking, and let's say, for example, they would want to go buy a car. I would give them, hey, here's what you need to consider. Here's what you need to take a look at. Make sure you got this amount of money. And let's say they didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be upset. I'd be angry, screaming at them, shouting at them. I told you shouldn't have done that. This is what I told you to do. You didn't listen. So then they're upset. They're crying.
Mm-hmm.
And so using that as an example, that's something their father would probably do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be upset. I told you this, but I'm their brother. So once I was able to change that dynamic of our relationship, that kind of released them to go forth and do some things on their own and not necessarily have to depend on me. We still open dialogue, open conversation, but that kind of set them free to go forth and do things. For me, that set me free. I'm no longer worried about having to tell them what to do and whether or not they did it. I didn't get upset about it. I'm their brother. I'm just here to give you some brotherly advice. Mm-hmm. So that really changed the dynamic of our relationship. And then came mom. Mm-hmm. And that was a tough one. Because, when you're the male of the house, you tend to have this, it's almost like a husband-wife relationship, but you're the son.
Right.
And so this pastor pointed out to me, and she said, you're not your mother's husband. Your mother calls you, your mother does this, the things that most women would probably do to their spouses, right? And that's the role that I was playing in that space, whether I realize it or not. And she said, when you think about it, if a mother's married to their son, what is that? I was like, oh, I don't know. At the time, I was like, I don't know. She's like, that's incest.
Right.
Right? She said that the relationship is not created to be like that. You're a son, and that's your mother. And again, we see that in a lot of the African American community.
That is so interesting. And I actually think I remember you talking to me about this. I was going through some stuff with my siblings, and it was like, you can't be their mom. You're their sister. You can guide, but we can't tell them what to do at the end of the day. And sometimes it creates way more stress than we need to have in our lives. And even, especially in single parent, family homes, that's a lot of times what happens is that the son ends up taking on this role that they didn't really need to have. You're almost like your mom's husband in a way, because she's relying on you, like emotionally, for these things that a husband should be doing. And then just kind of jumping back into, talking about purpose, especially when you're trying to figure what that is. There's so many things that can get in the way of, hearing God's voice when he's trying to communicate with us. And I think your example of what you gave is like it's a really great example, even from our family. It doesn't even have to just be toxicity from friends, but just, how we're carrying on relationships with our family too.
Yeah, it's a tough, I'll say perspective, because you're going to have some people that are just going to say, look, that's mama, and whatever mama needs, whatever mama says, I get it. But for me, in my situation, I had to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, mom, I love you, but I also have to be healthy, mentally, emotionally, to go forth and to, raise my family and do some of these things. Now, mom is still there. You don't forget mama.
Yeah, definitely.
But she understood, and she respected the decision I made. And it's not like I didn't stop talking to her. I just was slowly changing the dynamic of our relationship. So an example would be is, she would ask a question about, hey, I'm going to the store and I want to pick something up. What do you think I should get? I was like, well, what do you think you should get, Mom? Whereas before I would just tell her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we started to change the dynamic. Now there's times where she, calling up, oh yeah, you want to definitely get that one.
Mm-hmm.
But it just wasn't this codependency
Mm-hmm.
on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I've been able, for me, that was another turning point, which allowed me to kind of break free and go forth
Mm-hmm.
and do things. And as I continue my career, my journey, a lot of the people that I'm meeting, they're in a very similar situation, especially the African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar situation where they, mom is there and they're having to. There was a codependency, but they also acknowledge at some point where they had to kind of change the dynamic of their
Mm-hmm.
relationship too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, when you're trying to figure out and move forward in a positive way, you can't really do that if you're playing a role that you're not supposed to be playing in the first place, right?
That's correct.
So I wanted to jump back to something very important that you mentioned. You mentioned praying and seeking God, right? Which is so important. I really think that people have these ideals and, things that they want to pursue, and there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes when you're trying to manifest something and you haven't sought God for, you could be manifesting the wrong plan or the wrong purpose, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, your perspective, at least on the spiritual aspect of things.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head is that what I've learned is like when things aren't going great or aren't going as expected in life, the first thing I do is kind of check my priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's God first, family, work, and then whatever else comes after that, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
But when things aren't going right, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in the workplace, I go back and I look at my priorities and I can see where things are out of sync.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I can make that adjustment, then things get back on track. So that's kind of the first step. The second step that I like to take is taking a look at, I just lost thought of your question.
But keep going. It's okay.
Now, what was your question?
Oh, you need me to repeat it. Okay. I don't even know if I remember my question. No, I had said that, praying, and seeking God is a part of that, from your perspective spiritually.
Gotcha.
You
So yeah, the first step was the priorities. Second, taking a look at the priorities. Second step was, for me, is definitely praying, but also waiting and patience. That's one, I guess, character trait that's kind of, I've seen from me that's really helped me out over time is just being patient. It's hard, right? You want something. I mean, we live in this insta everything
right.
society.
Mm-hmm.
So patience has been very key for me in my journey. But just asking God, where does He want me to be? Whether it's a position that I'm pursuing, my prayer is, if that position is for me, open the door. If it's not, close that door. Because again, I don't want to step into a role or a position that He doesn't want me to be there. Because to me, as long as He's over that, then everything will work according to His plan and not my plan. And that's where sustainability and things like that come. Quick story. I was coming out of a management and training program. I was probably about two and a half years into my career. Got into this management training program. And from day one, everybody that was part of this cohort, they were getting promoted left and right.
Right.
And I'm sitting back and I'm like, man, I might be sitting here by myself at some point in time if I don't get out there and pursue certain roles. And so, I was just praying about it. I was like, God, I just, I don't think that one's for me. That one looks good. I don't know about that. And this opportunity came up, and I was like, that's the one.
Mhm.
And so I prepared for it. I interviewed, and I walked out of there, and I was like, yeah, I got it.
Mhm.
I just knew. And sure enough, 2 days later, I got the call, and it's like, hey, we want to bring you in. I was like, thank you. So then from there, I got into the role. And then about 6 months in, I got a tap on the shoulder, and he said, hey, we're looking to move people to either Colorado Springs or to Tampa.
Mhm.
And I said, And to rewind a little bit, I was on a vacation in Jamaica. I love the vacation.
Mhm. You show like it's on
I
vacation.
love the vacation. And was actually talking to a couple, and they were in real estate, so they're very familiar, and they're from Tampa. And they said, to be honest, Stan, I would probably choose Colorado Springs over Tampa.
Mhm.
I said, okay. So we there was a lot of other conversation and dialogue that took place. And then, I came back home, pulled out a scratch sheet of paper, and started weighing out the pros and cons. Long story short, that brought me out to Colorado Springs. So got to Colorado Springs, and this was about 2000, right before the marketing in 2008.
Mhm.
And so people that had actually moved to other roles had gotten let go from the organization.
Mhm.
My director called me up at home and was like, Stan, you have nothing to worry about.
Mhm.
We just moved you and your family out here. You have nothing to worry about.
That's how you know it was meant for you.
That's how I know, right?
Mhm.
And then other roles, like I've had to pass up roles. To rewind a little bit, when I first got into the organization, there was a meeting, predominantly African Americans across the organization, and where I was at the time, you didn't see too many African Americans in this particular department. And then so I got a tap on the shoulder, and they were like, "Hey, it's gonna be a lot of African American people." So it was kind
Secret
of
black meetings.
secret black meetings, right? And so I met an individual there, and at that time he was like, "Hey, we've got this like executive systems administrator position." I was like, "Man, that sounds good. Probably pays great." But I was like, "I'm fresh out of college. Like, do you really want to bring me in?" And so that's an opportunity that I probably could have jumped at. And I probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you today if I would have taken that opportunity, just as an example. And I knew that as good as it sounded, as much as it paid, I really felt deep down that opportunity was not for me.
Man, this is so good. I was actually gonna go a different direction, but then you said this, and so now I'm gonna say something else.
Okay.
But patience. Oh my goodness. I have never even thought about that, to be honest. Because I'm really big about walking in purpose, but sometimes you may not even get the vision for whatever it is you're trying to or you should be doing right away. And so just having the patience, and not just the patience, but the confidence to know, there is something for me here, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait. And I know for me, that's definitely not, me, Stan. Listen, I'm trying to get it done. But patience, that is so very, very important. So we have identifying generational curses, right?
Yep.
Um, understanding your family dynamic and what needs to change there.
Yep.
Being patient, praying, right? Along with that, I think when we're talking about purpose, right? We all have something or multiple things that we're here to do specific tasks that are here just for us. And we have to make some tough decisions sometimes,
Oh yeah.
right? We have to make some tough choices. And so along with that could be maybe we have to get rid of some relationships, some friends, or like you said, pass up an opportunity, right?
Yeah. Those are all great. It's a great point. I just recently, I guess I can say nixed or let go of a relationship. Actually with an individual that's a friend of mine. We've been friends for probably about 4 or 5 years. but it was, I'd say, letting that one go, that relationship go. A lot of it was due to um, he was always sharing false information
Mhm.
and, too much information outside of the code,
Right.
the circle. Um, I've got friends that I've known for 35 plus years. I don't want to give my age away, but
Mm.
35 plus years.
Yeah, he got kids, so do the math.
And I've always established kind of a inner circle of friends, and then a couple of layers removed. You go to the inner circle for certain things, and you go from to other layers for certain things as friendships. So yeah, over the years, I've had to let some unhealthy relationships go. And some were some of what I would have considered to be some of my best friends. And not to say that they were all like bad to where, someone was maybe, on drugs or something like that. A lot of it is just because of the dynamic of the relationship just wasn't healthy. So I've had to let some of those go. And I mean, some of them we may still have a conversation, see each other in passing. But I would say to the listeners is that, assess your relationships. And back to the point you made about prayer, one of the things that I was taught growing up was whenever you meet people, pray and ask God why that person was brought to you, or why you're in that relationship, or what the purpose of that relationship is. And you'll be surprised to see what is revealed as long as you take the time to listen and be aware and assess. And sometimes that does require patience too. So for me, just being able to let go some of those toxic relationships has definitely been freeing. And it's unfortunate because sometimes I see people to this day and it's just kind of high and by. And don't get me wrong, I love people.
Right.
I love people. I love relationships. I love getting to know people. But sometimes you have to move forward. And I think sometimes relationships are seasonal too. God may bring somebody into your life for a specific purpose or specific reason. It could be as simple as, you know what, hey, I met you, TK. You're introducing me to Kevin. Just never know.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I can even speak to it a little bit. I remember vividly the age of 26. And I don't know what we were doing. It was something we were doing, and God just spoke to me like in that moment.
Mm.
And he said, I can't elevate you or move you or help you achieve your purpose with this clouding your judgment. And so I had to make a very tough decision, to ultimately let this whole group, and it wasn't just one person, because sometimes it's not one person. Sometimes it's multiple people at one time that you have to be comfortable with removing. And I can legitimately say I was hurt, by having to let all of this stuff go. But in the end, I wouldn't even be sitting here probably had I not let those people go. So, and then sometimes people are just there for a season. Geez, this is such a good topic. Because when we're talking about purpose, there's just so many things that can compile into this, especially when you're not just doing purpose, but God's purpose. Like that's a whole nother layer, a spiritual layer that you have to consider too. But just having the confidence, I think, is so important because some people, they want to move out to the next step and maybe the door is open and it's there, but they just don't have the confidence. Oh, I don't know if it's going to work out, or, I can't do this, I can't do this, What would you say about self-doubt and having confidence?
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, well, I'd say I'm just blessed to have Mama Shirley because she's got all the confidence. And she's instilled that in all her children. We are very proud children. But I think it's goes back to having faith. If you can stand on faith, then And confidence doesn't always have to be this, hey, I'm the best person in the room. It can just be, I know this opportunity is for me. And being able to whether speak to it. But for me, just having a firm foundation on faith that, okay, even if this situation doesn't work out, or even if this job doesn't work out, I have faith that God has something else in store for me.
Mm-hmm.
But again, sometimes you just know that I need to walk through that door, or I need to go talk to that person. And I think that just comes with being patient. And I like to say, you practice how you play.
Right.
So I think we also have to spend time listening to what God. God will throw certain things your way,
Mm-hmm.
and if you keep running into it, He's throwing it in your direction for a reason, or throwing it in your path, putting it in your path for a reason. So having that sensitivity and awareness of, all right, how come every time I walk into this meeting, I'm always the first person that they want to hear speak,
Mm-hmm.
and it happens every time. So it's like, for me, that might say, okay, God might be preparing me for some sort of a speaking role, and He wants me to get in the habit of speaking up, or speaking first in a situation.
Can you share the story about the announcement?
Yeah. All right. So I guess another example would be is as far as preparation. I was about 20, 22, 23. I had gotten off my path
Mm-hmm.
that God had established, and created my own path. But always you always know where home is at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started going back to church, and this was a very small church at the time. And so, with churches in general, you normally have, regardless of the size of the church, 10% of people are people that are doing everything in the church, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Volunteers, this and that, sound. I bet you Kev probably does sound at the church too.
He did, actually.
There we go. So that's where I started out, with the media team. And so I would do the sound. We would make the tapes, CDs, all that. There I go, dating myself again. So one day I'm in the sound room, and I'm making the CDs for the sermon, for the message. And the pastor comes over. He says, "Stan, I really need you to give the announcements on Sunday." I'm like, well, "What? Like pre-record?"
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? No, we need you to get up in front of the church and give the announcements on Sunday. And he said, I really love your voice. I think everyone in church would love hearing your voice.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right, pastor. So I got up one Sunday and I started doing the announcements. And people were like, wow, Stan, you did a great job. You had everybody lively. It was a little different from what they were used to. And so I kept giving the announcements. For me, that kind of got me out of my comfort zone, of speaking in public. And then as I've seen over the years, it's resulted in a lot of other opportunities to speak in front of people. And the role that I have today, I'm in, a boardroom speaking to directors, CEOs, CFOs about their 401k plans.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and I had a dinner with my old pastor a couple years back, and I told him, I said, thank God for the announcements. I was like, because that has allowed me to do and be comfortable with what I do today, as far as speaking to whether it's audience or groups. DK, you and I, we've done a lot of presentations when it comes to financial literacy, for groups, for youth, for adults. And for me, I was just given that comfort of being able to give the announcements in front of a church, and being able to take that to various different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was God's preparation, because He knew, like, okay, hey, Stan, this is where I need you to be. And so the announcements was kind of that starting point.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for people to do things willingly, because you never know when God is preparing you for something. It's you with the announcements. You guys can't hear Kevin, but I'm just going to say a little bit about Kevin. Okay, because we grew up in the church together. We were church babies. And he actually did the sound and all the, the video stuff, all the tech, all that stuff. Kevin did it, right? And now he's doing this. He has this amazing studio. We're at Level 4 Studios. If you ever want to come check it out, he does, he has the studio that you can actually rent out for photography and stuff. And then he also has, the podcast space as well. But he's doing this amazing work that I don't think he would have done Otherwise, had he not done it, right, Kevin? You think? Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely not. And there's things in my life that had I not done them, I probably wouldn't have been here.
Yep.
So all good topics. So, geez, this time has gone by so fast. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. But what does living in one's purpose actually look like for you?
Hmm. For me, it's a great feeling, and I have this conversation with a lot of people because there's a lot of people that are searching their purpose, and quite often what we think is our purpose is not necessarily the case. So I definitely receive that as a blessing to understand my purpose, understand why I was created, and what I'm supposed to be doing. Um, but I think for me, it's definitely freeing because when I'm operating in my purpose, things just come easily, things come naturally. Um, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and they were about purpose. And they were saying, well, yeah, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do all these things. I said, well, that's great. Just make sure that that's what God wants you to do.
Mhm.
And I said, when God has you, when you're on God's path, He already has everything that that you'll need along the way. So I look at a Monopoly board, right?
Mhm.
You're going around this Monopoly board, and as long as you're on God's path, God's going to give you that $200 every time you pass go,
Mhm.
right? Whereas if you try to create your own path, just in that you're having to do all this extra work because you're creating it.
Right.
Whereas God has already created a path for you. There you go.
Oh, you about to have me speaking in tongues. Video sight. Oh,
I'm not here to preach, but
but that's so
I'm
good.
sharing the
though.
good news,
That
right?
is so good. Um, you're not just walking your own path, but God has already had this figured out for you a long time ago before you were even born. So all you got to do is just walk in it.
Just gotta walk.
You know.
My pastor would say, we were created to. Our feet were created for us to walk forward, not backwards, right? So all we have to do
You need
is
to go get your minister license.
all we've got to do is just walk along that path. And again, just going back to the awareness and assessing, when I've done it myself and I try to create this own path, it was always so much hard work.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm trying to knock down doors. I'm trying to do this. I'm up late at night trying to figure this stuff out. That wasn't for me.
Mhm.
Well, when I'm on God's path, I'm trying to figure something out. Someone will knock on the door and be like, "Hey, I think you might need this. Here's a
Right,
book."
there's no stress.
There's no stress.
There's no
right?
trying to calculate, carry the one
No,
to the side, the other side. It's just easy.
the money's there, the resources, the people. And don't get me wrong, life isn't perfect. Things happen in this world that we have no control over. But for me, I've been able to see where as long as I'm operating in my purpose, that's where everything's there. All my needs are met according to His riches and glory. And I don't have to ever worry about anything.
Mhm. And the cool thing about it is if you can do this confidently, unapologetically, slurring all the words, okay, I'm gonna quit. You guys know what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
Along with that, I lost my train of thought trying to pronounce that word. But yeah, so you're doing it, you're not apologizing for it. God will really, not only will He bless you, but He'll give you the desires of your heart,
Mhm.
things that you want. He'll bless you with those things on top of that, just for you taking the initiative to trust Him and
Yep.
just kind of walk along that path, which is so amazing. People don't believe it, but it's true. Everyone who's successful does this,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. I've had a lot of conversations with people, and not everyone believes is a Christian. Not everyone's a believer. They are following some higher power according to them. But for me, just being grounded in my faith is very important. And granted, I'm not perfect,
Mhm.
but being grounded is very important, and just being able to hear and follow. That's the only way I know how to do life. I've tried it the other ways. just doesn't work.
Mhm.
I end up butting my head. I end up losing money. I end up probably in places where I shouldn't be. But just being grounded, allowing him to kind of guide and direct me is the best place for me to be. It's liberating. It's free. You can you can speak into other people's lives. You're able to help people. You have the resources. So that's the choice that I make.
That's a good choice. Well, thank you, Stan. This is really good. Really quick before we close, just one last final thought from
Mhm.
you. What do you want our listeners to walk away with? What are some actionable steps that they can do right now to change?
I would say, I'd probably say just being able to assess. Well, first make the decision that you want to make the change,
Mhm.
and then to go back and assess the great things that you have going and working for you. Assess the people that you're around.
Mhm.
Assess some of the generational curses or cycles. Um, it might require some additional research, and then from there, make the decision to move forward. Don't look back. Don't fault yourself. Don't hold yourself down. I mean, again, a lot of people tend to hold themselves down because they've made mistakes. Ask for forgiveness and keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And then I think that'll allow people to receive, whether it's healing, whether it's um, information that will kind of help either direct or guide them to what their purpose is. And then the last thing is get out of the house. Go out there and be relational.
Yeah, go experience
Yeah,
stuff.
go experience stuff. Go experience new people, different people.
Mhm.
Don't always operate in your comfort zone. Look for opportunities that operate outside of your comfort zone. I
Mhm.
think that's where a lot of growth will take place. So that's what I'll leave the listeners with until next time.
That's good.
Mm.
All right, so that wraps up the show. Before we close, I just wanted to close with just one scripture that I really want you guys to read, study, and just meditate on until we get to the next week. Jeremiah 29:11-13. And if you have a chance, really the whole chapter, Jeremiah 29 is a really good one to read. But it says here, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye come upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you.
Mm.
Ye shall seek and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. So I think that kind of
Amen.
sums up what we talked about nicely.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, Stan, where can they follow you at? If our listeners want to go and kind of learn more about you or just keep tabs on what you're doing.
I'd say my LinkedIn page, Stanley Gbandawa, LinkedIn.
And Gbandawa spelled Gbandawa.
Gbandawa.
I knew it.
I think I want to really start using my LinkedIn platform to push out a lot of the things that I'm doing in the community. I've kind of been a little reserved with it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of great things that's happening here in our community. Other people that I'm plugged into. So I think that'll be a good place for people to find out some of the things that I'm working on and some of the organizations that I'm part of. A lot of it's to really help underserved, underprivileged people, children, African American communities. So I'd say start with LinkedIn and go from there.
Okay, so search link Stanley Gbandawa on LinkedIn. And so, yeah, that's the end of our show. So if you like what you heard today, make sure you hit the like button, make sure that you subscribe, and then also leave comments. I'm really interested, in what you guys say. I promise you, if you comment, I'm going to read it and may even possibly respond. You can follow me at Back and Forth TV on Instagram and Facebook. Same thing for Twitter. I'm still learning how to use Twitter. Don't judge me. Okay. And I'm also on Snapchat as well. I think that's under my actual name, @THarding_192. So, but until then, thank you guys so much for joining me and have a blessed week. I'll see you next time.